Hey, everybody out there in YouTube land. Welcome to a special edition of Dungeons and Discussions. I'm T-shirted historian, and this is my associate Grim, who we're going to be talking to today.
Well,
All right.
You're going to be talking to me.
Yes, I'm actually going to be talking to you. Like I never talk to you, ever. All right, but what we're going to be talking about today is Wightchester, Prison City of the Damned, which is up on Indiegogo right now. And let's see, I've actually got a link to it. One moment, please. We're so prepared here.
Prepared enough.
Yes.
Barely.
There we go. There is definitely a link already in the description to the campaign, as well as to Grimm's personal site, so either way, you can find your way to it and check it out if you want. We will also show the video sequence from it at some point. But for now, I gotta ask. Let's just start off. Okay, Grimm, what is Wightchester, Prison City of the Damned?
Well, first I think we should deal with the obvious ethical issue that this is the show that we do together. We know each other. You've backed the project and all that stuff.
Oh, well, that's true. Yes. I have backed the project, so I'm not in any way getting compensated for this other than just helping out a friend. Yes. Try to get his stuff sold, so.
Yeah. So I'm a bit of a stickler for that kind of thing.
Not a problem.
So what is Wightchester? Wightchester is a city in southern England in a slightly different sort of alt history, at least slightly different up to the point where everything kicks off. It used to be called Witchester. Then we had the plague and the war with the Dutch and the restoration of the monarchy. And then in 1666, a comet streaked across the sky and the dead began to rise. And nowhere more so than in Witchester. Witchester was overrun. They sealed the gates, sealed the city wall, and left the dead to stay there. Then they thought, well, we've got this whole city full of the undead. We've managed to get rid of all the rest that rose during this event. But this thing's still there. How can we put it to use? I know, let's put prisoners in there. And so the normal setup for the game setting will be you're a prisoner, you've been sent to Wightchester, and you have to survive, thrive, maybe find a way out, maybe find a way to cleanse the city, something. So it's a pretty sort of open-ended sandbox city crawl adventure.
Nice. All right. Oh, hey, Squeak a Mouse. If you get bangers and good cider, then you're in. Otherwise, you don't care how many undead there are. I don't know if they're served. I don't know if I'd want to buy any bangers from a zombie. I don't know. Probably have a little bit of fingers in there.
Did you make it yourself, or did you make it from yourself?
Exactly. I do have to ask. I've been curious about this. Is Witchester an actual place in England? Or?
No, it's most closely based on Winchester, where I went to college, because it has quite a lot of interesting history, and it's about the right size. But there's also elements of Canterbury and Salisbury, where I went to art college. So yeah, there's a mix of different influences from real places, but it isn't a real place.
Ah, okay.
But it could easily be.
Mm-hmm. Which is always cool because, it's that's one thing I do like about historical settings is historically plausible in the setting.
Yeah, so it's basically an extra city with a lot of its history is similar to Winchester, but then it's got aspects of these other places.
Okay. The comet thing, raising the dead, does have some similarities to the old Night of the Living Dead movie with George Romero, where originally the thought was that it was the radiation from the Venus probe that was bringing the dead back to life.
Yeah. But
later on, Romero actually said, no. It's actually all the dead are just rising because if it's a supernatural event, it has nothing to do with that. So.
Just a coincidence that people were searching around for something to blame it on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that makes me curious. The Wightchester Rising, is it actually because of the comet, or is it a supernatural event, something you can actually find in the city?
There were several comets around that period, but not bang on 1666. And comets have always been considered an ill omen. I think it's Halley's Comet in particular. When it comes around, it's been associated with bad things happening. But there were a couple fairly close together in that period, which didn't exactly calm people down when it came to all the bad shit that happened, like the plague and everything else. So I mean, that's something you'll have to find out. But there are definitely aspects of the city that relate to the comet. There's an astronomer who you can find and meet, who may have some insights or may not.
Okay, so there are actually still living people inside the city, just basically barricaded and holed off from the undead? Or?
Yeah, there's a few small factions of scavengers or people who've holed themselves up or have managed to survive by whatever other means, and then there's this moaning horde of undead of various kinds all around the city, infesting it.
So it's not all just zombies.
No. Well, there's going to be a wide variety in the zombies, but there will also be other creatures as well. Ghosts, because people who die a horrible death are going to leave a vengeful spectre behind. Ghouls. In some traditions, you become a ghoul by resorting to cannibalism, and if there's not a lot of food around and there's only other survivors to prey on, then that's something that might happen. And other weirder and stranger things besides.
Okay. That is kind of cool. I'm just curious, are there going to be any like demonic influences or outer world influences, Cthulhu influences, Lovecraft type things?
There is some of the lore around the city and its past will tap into some sort of demonic elements. I've dialed the religious aspect up a bit because it was a time of great religious upheaval, and weird cults and splinter movements and sort of religio-political movements and so on as well. So I've dialed that up slightly. There are names of demons, and there may be things that involve demons. And if you're playing a magic using class, then you definitely have something to do with demons. So I couldn't leave that out exactly.
Cool. Yeah, this does sound good already. We do have a question already. Squeak a Mouse wants to know, how linear is it?
It's not linear at all. It's a complete sandbox. You can go where you want, do what you want. You may get eaten for so doing by one thing or another, but you're free to explore, survive, whatever. It's completely non-linear.
I'm curious. Is there actually like a finite amount of undead? I mean, is it actually possible to clean out the entire city?
Yeah, it will be possible, but you have to keep in mind that more prisoners are being shipped in all the time, and some of them are falling prey to the undead. So there's a slow trickle of potential new zombies constantly. But I do have a figure for the population of the city and how many of them returned. So.
Cool. See, that would be, if I were going to focus a campaign on it, that would probably be my focus. It'd be like, okay, well, you're stuck here, so your only choice to survive is pretty much to clean the place up. But
yep.
But that may be more difficult than it sounds, especially if there are ghosts and things, because a lot of those creatures require special weaponry to deal with.
Yeah, which is going to be hard to come by.
Mm-hmm. How hard will it be to make that stuff in the game or in the city? To
make magic stuff? I mean, by default, it's using Grimdark, so there aren't magic items every 2 paces. Mm-hmm. But if you break into the cathedral or one of the churches and steal a silver crucifix, maybe you can use that as a club for a while until it gets all bent out of shape. there won't be any holy water left in the fonts and so on because it will have evaporated. But if you can find a priest, maybe he can bless some water for you.
Yeah. And okay, speaking of priests, oh yeah, Squeaka asked a good question. I was about to ask the same question, so we were on the same track. What will classes be like? Is the arcana fantasy magic? We're talking old school alchemy.
So by default, Grimdark is a relatively low magic setting. So by and large, you won't be hurling fireballs and things around, at least not willy-nilly. So yeah, it's more like alchemy. The sort of replacement for sort of druid or witch class is the cunning folk, which is an actual thing from history. So they were kind of followers of the old ways, which typically meant Celtic tradition and repositories of folklore and wisdom. And they were like the wise women of the village who you'd go to if you couldn't afford to see a doctor.
Oh, yeah.
That sort of thing. But most of their magic is fairly subtle. But in this game world, the kind of witchcraft that they were paranoid about does also really exist. So you might be able to turn yourself into a rabbit or something to run away, but mostly it's pretty low key or reliant on ingredients or something. So you don't so much get spells as you get gifts and special abilities by either practicing witchcraft, or in the case of the more mage class, it's more like the Goetia or Western ceremonial magic. It's all about making pacts and getting gifts from demons. So instead of a spell, you might get an amulet that will ward off iron blades, or you might get to learn how to speak to the birds, or things like that.
Okay, that sounds pretty cool. And yeah, here's the next question, which I would think everybody would want to know: are there clerics?
The priesthood is extremely important. Obviously, this was a much more religious time. This was basically the point at which science began to overtake religion. I mean, we'd just been through the plague and the Civil War and the Restoration, so religion was at a kind of high mark for a while, because of all the superstition and the fear of everything that was going on. But then Newton comes out with his great discoveries. The Royal Society is formed, which is like the first proper organization of scientists, really. So this is at the kind of turning point from faith-based thinking to rationalism, and the Enlightenment, certainly for England. But there are priests. If you're playing a priest, why are you being thrown into a prison? Have you done something? Have you done something naughty? Are you a heretic? But yeah, there are clerics, but their abilities, again, like the others, they're not quite so. It's not so much about healing people necessarily as offering prayer and knowing some basics of healing and boosting people's morale, blessing them, giving them bonuses, that sort of thing. It plays much more like a support class than a healer class, I would say.
Nice. My curiosity is, because of the setting, I know that the night soil men were a profession at that time, which is basically these are guys who are empowered to break open toilets and stuff like that to gather poop and stuff, because that is a common. The nitrates are the ingredient for gunpowder, so I'm guessing gunpowder, black powder weaponry will be available. It
will. They were called gong farmers.
Yeah.
Now, the only thing you can't really get is sulfur. So that's the thing that's really hard to get hold of. You can make black powder just out of saltpeter and ground down coal or charcoal or some other source of carbon, but that does make a lot more smoke and fouls the guns a lot quicker. They're also less powerful, less accurate, because you don't have the same amount of velocity and so on. So this is something that actually does make a difference in the game. I don't tend to like to get too simulationist, but I wanted proper gunpowder and proper shot and so on to be a really important commodity. So there are black powder weapons, but getting decent gunpowder and decently cast shot to use in your weapons, that's going to be difficult.
That's a cool element. I'm really glad that you took the time to put that in there, because The historian in me is kind of going, "Ooh, this is scrubby. This is so wonderful."
Yeah, I did a ton of research on black powder weapons and things. We're just too early for the puckle gun, unfortunately. But,
The square bullets.
yes, square bullets for Turks, wasn't it?
Ugh.
And round bullets for Christians.
Oh, Squeak has got a lot of questions. She's really interested. So, could you potentially be a cleric of the summoning type?
Not so much at the higher levels. I mean, and this is all if you're using my Grimdark rules. If you're just using straight 5e, it's going to be different, or whatever other system you might choose to play. You can have the invisible presence of like guardian angels and spirits around you. That's about as close as it gets, I think. But that's more towards the higher levels.
Okay. And you do mention the Grimdark rules a lot. So will they be required to play?
They're not required. It will be statted for standard 5e, Grimdark 5e, Morkborg, and Old School Renaissance, specifically Lamentations of the Flame Princess.
Nice. And those, yeah, having played all those, they definitely lend themselves to that Grimdark atmosphere. And actually, I do like the Grimdark system that you came up with, including the classes, which I think we're going to fit this really, really well.
Yeah, they're mostly modified from existing 5e classes, just given a different flavor. So instead of monk, there's like bare knuckle boxer. Mm-hmm. Instead of fighter, you've got soldier, which means you've had formal training and so on. Yeah, and so on it goes. And you can also play normal people. It's peasants, guildsmen, which is sort of the middle class, or nobility.
What are their chances of survival there, you think?
Not too awful, I think. Peasants have lots of useful survival skills. Guildsmen have useful crafting skills, and the nobility have a certain air about them, perhaps. Also have access to better education and so on, which might prepare them better. They'd start out the game better able to bribe the guards to bring in more equipment and things. So
that's an interesting take on it. So potentially you could play a class that is pretty far removed from the standard heroic fantasy trope and have a decent chance to survive and thrive in this game.
Yeah, because the kind of skills like, growing food that don't necessarily come up in a normal D&D game. You're going to be confined in this area. Maybe you fortify somewhere, or you can trade on that skill. All right, if we can get some seed and some decent soil, I can probably grow some crops here, and then we won't have to be eating crows and pigeons all the time.
I like that. It does seem very simulationist. It does have a little bit of a flavor of Walking Dead or any other zombie apocalypse, but it also has the long-term effects taken into account, which I like that idea.
Horror is probably one of the most difficult things to bring across in role-playing games. It's really hard to create and maintain that atmosphere. I think only comedy is more difficult, but certain kinds of horror are easier than others. And I think survival horror, when you're dealing with scarcity of resources and forcing people to make survival decisions all the time, that works quite easily. The other easy one is to just go full-on gory, disgusting descriptions of everything. It's a lot easier to disgust people than it is to horrify them. But this is more in the survival horror vein.
Nice. And Lord Thoth says, "Can't wait to be undead." And that would be an interesting class to play in this. I have seen in the past there were rules to allow you to play the Revenant, which is a monster from early D&D, which is basically like a person who's returned from the dead in order to seek vengeance, which is basically what the Crow is.
Yeah.
I think something like that would be kind of fun to play in this too, especially considering that you're in a place that's full of criminals. So the likelihood that you're, the person who did you wrong may be in here also.
Yeah, that's certainly a possibility. obviously most people who die are going to rise as zombies due to the state of the city. But other undead are available.
Will there be any playable undead? Just out of curiosity.
By default, no, but certainly you could. It's probably not a good idea to be a vampire with such a small living population around.
Yeah. Stop eating my herd, you damn zombies.
Yeah. But there are certainly options. Yeah.
Okay, that's kind. I mean, I'm looking at possibilities as a GM because I'm like, if I'm gonna use this setting, I really want to get the most out of it.
I mean, the worst thing would be a revenant stuck in the city who can't get out to seek vengeance.
Yeah, that would be
that would be pretty bad.
That would be pretty bad. Okay, so kind of on a tangent. This is a horror setting. I'm curious if you would want to compare it or how it would compare to the other big horror setting that everybody knows about for 5th edition. How does it stack up, you think?
You mean Ravenloft?
That one, yes.
So I got told off for this, but I do think Ravenloft always put me in mind of the old Hammer horror films.
Yeah.
There was a lot of high drama. It was new versions of the old monsters, Vampire Lord, Mummy Lord, Frankenstein's monster, things like that. So it was always a bit campy, I think. But the older version still had decent elements of horror to it. The newer one doesn't really. It just feels so kind of anodyne. It doesn't take any risks. It takes the opposite of risks, whatever that is.
It's very safe.
It's very safe, and yet seems to consider itself to be something new and daring and progressive and so on. But I don't think horror works in that way. I mean, often horror taps into social issues, but the way that horror taps into those social issues is to raise difficult questions about them or to amp up the horror of them. If you look at something like Candyman, which I watched again recently, it's all about urban myth and how the projects have been abandoned and sort of white do-gooders going in, not understanding how anything works down there and getting caught up in it all. So it kind of relies on issues of racism, white savior complex, urban decay and neglect and so on to bring the horror to life. Whereas Ravenloft doesn't do that at all anymore. So I don't know that it compares. I mean, so Ravenloft has its pocket realms, but you can move between them and you can move in and out of Ravenloft or the other Dark Kingdoms. Whereas here you're trapped. I mean, it's a big area. It's a lot of stuff in it, but ultimately you are surrounded by walls and an army of armed men who will shoot anything that so much as peeks over the wall the moment they see it. So it's much more enclosed. It's much more claustrophobic, I think. And there's not so, I mean, some people have drawn the comparison between COVID and A Lake of Zombies. Yeah, but I came up with this idea many, many years ago and have delayed it because something came out that was too similar to it. But if there is social commentary there, then it's about Britain's past rather than anything really that current. I mean, certain issues are fairly eternal, rich versus poor. And zombies have always been some sort of, well, since Romero anyway, some sort of social commentary to them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of guessing you've probably watched a lot of zombie films in order to get inspiration for this. Yeah,
and a lot of films set in the right period, so 17th century, English Civil War through to 1700. There's not actually that many films set around then, and sometimes only a fraction of the film is actually suitable or worth it. Like I rewatched Solomon Kane, and the first half to 2/3 of that is appropriate, and then it kind of goes off on one a bit. But that was good. A Field in England isn't really a horror film. It's very art house, but just the way the people act and talk and so on, that's good. So I think it was Witchfinder General is an old film. That's quite good. Yeah. And nice. Reading Defoe's Diary of a Plague Year was obviously a must.
Oh, I have to check that one out for sure. All right. Well, let me think. So resources are going to be scarce for your characters. I'm guessing when they're first thrown into the prison, they have nothing.
So by default, you'll get like a loaf of bread, a lump of maggoty cheese, a water skin, and the clothes on your back, and that'll be pretty much it. You can try and hide things from the guards, and you can also try and bribe the guards with whatever money you started out with. But obviously, it's going to be a hell of a lot more expensive than just buying equipment for your character, and you won't necessarily get everything through the gate.
So no two-handed sword for the fighter or anything. No.
I mean, you can't exactly keister that.
If you can, I'm not messing with you. That's kind of scary. It's kind of like, where were you hiding that thing?
But stale bread and maggoty cheese is better than most of the stuff you'll find inside.
Oh, I imagine, yeah. Especially since there's not anybody around to cook it.
I had to go off on a huge research tangent the other day when I was like halfway through describing a building to check exactly what foods were available in the time period and what stuff would have been capable of being preserved. And other than like pickling and making jams and salting stuff, there weren't really a lot of options. So even if you do go scavenging, you're mostly going to be eating pickles and jam, if you can find it, given how expensive sugar was, and things like what do you call it over there? Head cheese.
Oh yeah, head cheese.
Yeah, so there's pickled head cheese and pork trotter and stuff like that.
Maybe if you're lucky, there's some honeybees.
Because it's a year after all this happened, so any remotely fresh produce has gone to rot. You might find some root vegetables. You might find a kitchen garden that's still surviving well enough to produce something to nibble. Maybe you can take down a pigeon or a rat or a crow. But then what's the crow been eating? Do you really want to eat a crow that's been eating zombies?
Exactly. That kind of brings another interesting question in. Certainly, most players of regular D&D and fantasy tropes are going to be used to having things like an abundance of healing and damage mitigation abilities to offset combat, which sounds like it's going to be fairly prevalent in the game, just due to the fact that you have a lot of enemies who are basically fearless. So how is handling or healing going to be handled in the game? I mean, are you going to have like herbalism and that sort of thing have to take the place of a lot of that, poultices?
Yeah, mostly that sort of thing. Now, the way Grimdark handles it is you have your hit points, but then you also have morale, which is somewhat similar to the way the old D20 Star Wars had, I think it was vitality and hit points. But you can spend your morale to increase your rolls or to mitigate damage and so on. But they otherwise operate mostly like normal hit points. So if a priest utters a prayer over you, he's not restoring your health, he's restoring your morale. And you may get a very small amount of healing. But I wanted to encourage people to be careful and then to use their morale to get out of the trouble they get themselves into when they're not careful, but for it not to be so a hugely abundant resource. So the main thing is to be careful and tactical, which is much more like old school play.
Yeah. Okay. Which kind of brings me to another question. Once again, having lots of people who are used to, more or less steamrolling regular D&D sessions and things like that. Because 5th edition really does have a lot of class abilities. And let's just say that rather than going for Grimdark, people just say, "Oh, well, I'm just going to incorporate this into my regular 5th edition campaign and use standard characters." Is there going to be? I mean, how is the frustration factor going to be handled? I mean, there are going to be a lot of TPKs, things like that.
Well, I kind of maybe it's a bit too ambitious, but I kind of want to act like a bridge between the two styles of play.
Mm-hmm.
So to produce something that normal 5e players can play, but maybe they'll get to see the good side of playing something that is more difficult, where you do have to think more, where you can die. But I think it's very important to prime the players that this is how it's going to be, so they don't go in with unrealistic expectations. I mean, even if you are playing it with standard 5e, I would advise people to enforce material components for magic.
Mm-hmm.
Properly keep track of ammo, or all of those kind of things, just to enhance that survival mechanic side. And one thing that is good about standard 5e, at least so far as this game is concerned, single big bad guy baddies tend to die a lot more easily and do a lot less damage than swarms of lower challenge rating creatures.
Oh.
So given we've got lots and lots of zombies, you can only cast Fireball so many times, and it makes a huge amount of noise and sets fire to buildings, which is something you don't want to happen. So it's going to draw down more and more of the dead on you, and lots of individual baddies does tend to wear down even 5th edition characters faster and more effectively than, say, one big dragon or something.
Oh, okay. Now, this is a mechanic I wasn't sure if you were going to incorporate or not. I've seen it utilized in tabletop games like Zombicide, where noise discipline becomes extremely important, because that is the motivating attraction factor for the undead. So I guess lots of fighting, commotion, and stuff like that is going to draw more hordes and stuff to you.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm going to put in any hard and fast rules for that, but it's definitely something I would advise any games master to pay attention to. If you're ransacking a building, for example, and you're breaking glass and cracking open chests, thumping up and down the stairs, fighting zombies on the roof or whatever, you're going to draw attention. So, there will be random encounter tables.
Mm-hmm.
And so a variety of other zombies might show up and start laying siege to the house. And then, you're in trouble.
Yeah, Lord Thoth says it becomes important to move silently. Yeah, I would think so. Suika says she has a tanking cleric, so she has unrealistic expectations. Yeah, I wouldn't put the cleric up front, hon. I don't think that would work so well. We have a really good question out here from the audience. Hey, Kip Marlowe, it's nice to see you. Did you consider creating standard zombies as mooks like Feng Shui before settling on more traditional OSR mechanics?
I'm a fan of mook mechanics, and Feng Shui, good call out. And that was something I liked. One of the few things I liked about 4th edition was those fractional XP, hordes of baddies that you could throw at people that would basically die after a hit. But it didn't feel appropriate to this to just carve your way through them that easily. It felt like there should be some threat to them for a good amount of time before they just became background, like they did in the Walking Dead we've talked about.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I wanted them to be fairly resilient, and they will just kind of become more mookish as you grow in power and find more useful materials and kit and so on.
I'm kind of guessing the barbarian and the monk will probably have the biggest advantage for starting parties. But
yeah, well, in Grimdark, the barbarian is called something else. Fuck, can't even remember my own game terms. But the monk, it becomes the sort of bare knuckle fighter. Because martial arts monks isn't really very, very fitting in that era.
Yeah, and likewise, I guess a big hulking barbarian really wouldn't be either.
No, brute. That's it, brute. Yeah. So think Princess Bride for the brute.
Oh yeah, there you go. That would be awesome. Yeah. And what I'm thinking about, I mean, as far as the barbarian being a good class to start with, would just be with the fact that their rage gives them all that damage mitigation ability. But
yeah, and extra damage, and lots of hit points. So yeah.
Are you going to be using swarm mechanics with the zombies? Because I mean, they've had swarms since the 3.x, where they can attack and they always hit and things like that.
I think that'll be an option, but it's not one that I'm using by default. It makes sense in some situations, but it makes more sense to treat zombies individually in most situations.
Okay. I remember an old take on zombies from Year of the Zombie, which I worked on, was if you hit a big enough mob of zombies, quite literally, they had attacks that would it was like an automatically that they would just instantly drag you down and tear you apart, eat you kind of thing. I don't know if you're going to implement any of that. But.
Well, if you're completely surrounded, that's going to be what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 zombies if you're using squares, and 3 of those are going to be on your flanks. So they're going to be fighting with advantage. So I think it kind of takes care of itself to an extent.
Yeah. In this case, it was almost like an amorphous mob of zombies that would just tear you apart. But yeah, I could see the difference. I am kind of curious. Okay, this is a big location because it's an entire city. How much of it is physically mapped out to where you can actually move from one end of the city to the other?
All of it will be. I'm about 2/3 of the way through writing up the locations. I've got a rough sort of thumbnail sketch of the different districts, and then I will be going in and determining where everything is, and then hopefully I'll be able to hire a cartographer to make it look pretty.
Wow. This kind of project, what it reminds me of, and it makes me very excited to think about, is you remember an older thing from Judges Guild called City State of the Invincible Overlord?
I've never actually seen that, and I made a conscious choice not to when I started writing this.
Well, I actually have a copy of it, and it's literally an entire city from end to end with its own built-in locations and places and everything, and all these descriptions and stuff. I mean, it's like literally you could have an entire campaign set in the city, and it could just go on and on and on.
Yeah, this will be pretty much like that.
I like that idea a lot. I like the idea of having the campaign entirely contained within one city and making the city kind of a living, breathing entity that
not exactly
grows
living.
and dies. Well, yeah, dead and dying, I guess, but in this case.
Sorry to do this, but I need a bio break really quick. So
Oh, not a problem.
I shall be back imminently.
I will talk to the chat in the meantime. Chat, you got any questions for Grim? When he gets back, please, start posting them up, and we'll do that. We've got a little bit of time. And once again, I'm not getting any compensation for doing this interview. I mean, Grim is a friend, but I am paying for and backing this on Indiegogo out of my own funds. I'm not getting a free copy or anything. but I was genuinely interested in the project. Not just because Grimm is my buddy, but because it's a cool idea. It's something I like a lot. I own a copy of Grimm's Grimdark book, and I like the grim and gritty, realistic rules that it presents because I'll be honest, I think a lot of 5th edition D&D needs to kind of be taken down a peg, and players need to be brought down to remember it's like, hey, yes, you're great heroes, you're capable of fantastic deeds, but you're also mortal clay, and you can be killed and taken out just as readily as the 15 or so goblins that you killed with such abandon. And I think I'm kind of hoping that this setting will bring a lot of that back. It's not so much that I want to punish players, but I want to see them challenged. Just to be honest, when I first started my GMing career, I was kind of a killer dungeon master. I thought it was so funny to, watch players get killed in traps or get overrun and torn apart and TPK'd and everything. But as I grew a little bit more and I watched players succeeding and how much more exciting it was to actually see them overcome some of these horrible things that I used to do to them, I started realizing that it was actually more fun to see players succeed and to challenge them. And that's kind of where I have been in my GMing for the last, 37 years, 36 years. I think that players need a challenge, that's the best measure of being a hero is by how the players are challenged and how they overcome them. So a lot of the modern 5th edition stuff with being able to just to mitigate damage, to use second wind to heal up and things like that, although I can appreciate it, it does kind of make D&D seem like it's easy mode 5th edition, which is one of the reasons why I like OSR, old school Renaissance style gaming. Godbound, Lamentations of the Flame Princess, that kind of thing is my favorite stuff to run. But let's see. Smoke him if you got him. Yeah, no kidding, Lord Thoth. I think he's about back. And Zach, you say that's a huge to have a detailed space to play in, especially when it's contained. Yeah, I agree. That is really exciting to me. I love that idea. It's the whole city is pretty much like your dungeon, from what I can tell, and I like that idea. And hey, you're back.
I am back indeed.
All right.
Too many sodas. It's gotten hot here again.
Oh, I'm sorry. Lord Thoth says he's backer 31 or something, maybe 21. Cool. Kit has another good one. Kit is on the ball, man. Kit is really good. I'm glad to have you in the audience, Kit.
With a name like that, I expect him to.
Mm-hmm. So I've heard Grimm discuss the detailing of every building individually, which I really like, but someone is going to ask, why not just have a bunch of random content tables? And, of course, he adds that he's not a fan of 10 tables. I don't think Grimm is either.
No, well, they have their uses. There will be random tables in the back if people prefer to do things that way, and there certainly will be for zombie encounters because it makes sense that they'll be somewhat random. But the trouble with doing all this randomly is it's hard to have a memory of what has happened, what has been looted, and so on for each location, because you've just done it randomly on the fly. So if they revisit the location and you roll randomly again, it's not going to make any sense. So for me, it was important to have a baseline of what's in these buildings, what supplies are in these buildings, what happened in these buildings, what were these buildings used for before everything happened, and all of that. So each one has its own little kind of self-contained story that isn't spelled out, but what happened to the people who were living there. And once you've used up the supplies in that building, they're gone. So there's space for a GM to note that they took this, make a scribbled quick note, and then demolished half the roof. And that way, if you revisit that location again, you'll know, and you'll be able to have that consistency and maintain that suspension of disbelief that you can't if you just roll everything randomly.
I love that, man. I am so glad that you do that. And I was actually going to ask if there were going to be little self-contained stories, because that is my favorite part of GMing and role-playing in all games. Is you go to a location and you see skeletons that are holding hands or something, and next to them is like a razor blade or something. It's kind of like, oh, that's kind of sad, because you could figure out what happened just from the context clues. Yeah,
there's a lot of that kind of thing, and you can kind of figure out what happened from the way I described the bloodstains, or the way the bodies are slumped, or the absence of bodies, or whether the furniture's been broken up and nailed to the windows, all of that kind of thing. So every building has its story in that way. And when I go back and do probably the penultimate edit, I'm going to add in more story elements. So say you might break into a gentleman's house in one of the posher districts in pursuit of his wine cellar or something, because that's something you can trade to the guards, and he's bound to have some decent stuff. But as you're rifling through his things, you might find love letters to him from someone from the lower classes, like a maid or something, and a half-finished letter from him to his lady love. And then maybe you can track down where she lived and find out what happened to her. So there'll be, and find a stash of letters there. So there'll be that kind of thing as well, sort of emergent story. The idea of there was like a Mary Celeste almost.
Oh.
That life was going on before it just stopped.
Wow, that is awesome, man. Dude, I'm getting so excited for this thing, man. I want to read it now. And what's cool about this is, I don't know if other GMs, other players, and things like that are like me. I certainly think so, because I've had James Edward Radji IV has mentioned this himself. But when you read an adventure, whether or not you ever actually get to play it, there is kind of a sense of kind of wonderment to it, because you almost kind of can put yourself in the same situation, in the same setting. It's like, okay, here's a room with 4 kobolds and a pot and a guy, on a spit or something, and it's just kind of like, as you read through the adventure, you kind of get into it yourself. And the fact that you have all these little miniature stories built into this adventure to begin with, that's gonna be fun to read. How many pages is this thing gonna be?
It's probably going to be around 500 pages.
Oh my gosh, that's a big old tome. That's gonna be great.
I may have to split out the separate rules conversions into other booklets. Rather than having them in the main book. It depends how things pan out. But 500 pages is probably about the limit.
Man, that is awesome. So that's going to be a nice big chunky healthy book that you could put on your shelf along with your other ones.
Yeah, and it's not just the city. So like, there's a bit of a primer on what England was like at the time. There's some history of the city, so you get a kind of grounding and an idea going right the way back to the Stone Age. I mean, I don't spell everything out in explicit detail, but I know, even if you don't, and I think that does come through in a lot of the writing. I didn't want to overwhelm people with background, because a lot of it doesn't really matter, because you're just kind of locked in a prison city. But it's there if you want it, and it should lead you on to do your own research if you become interested in the period and so on.
Okay.
But part of the reason I set it in southern England is because that's where I live, and I know the history of these cities. My speciality was always pre-Christian Britain. Obviously, this goes later than that. But for example, during the Stone Age in Britain, they would mine flints out of the ground because this all used to be seabed. So there's loads of flint and chalk and so on. And so we found Stone Age mines where they were using antlers to dig down under the earth and find flints to nap into spearheads and arrowheads and so on. And you'll still occasionally find those. You also find all kinds of fossils after they've ploughed the fields, because again, it used to be seabed. And then it goes right the way through, Roman times all the way up. So like the suffix Chester comes from caestra, which was the Roman term for a fortification.
Yeah.
So it gets its name from that, and then the wit means white. So there's a small town about 5 miles away from me called Wightchester, which was called that because its church was made out of flint and covered with chalk and so on, and so it was a white church. So that became the name of the city.
That is awesome.
The town. So yeah, it's all there, and the cathedral in the city is built on the site that was the Norman castle that would have been situated there. So it's raised up a bit from the rest of the city.
I gotta ask, it's a big enough city to support obviously a graveyard, and I'm guessing the graveyard is contained within the city. I'm guessing that graveyard is probably going to be like the most dangerous place to be in the whole city.
Yeah, and around the cathedral, a lot of people used to get buried around cathedrals. They would pay for the privilege to be interred under the floors or to be buried close to there. Plus, there's just been a bout of plague. Now, the 1666 plague killed about 1/3 of the population of London. So, if you imagine this as being an early modern city, maybe with a population of 12,000, and a third of them were already dead and buried when this happened, you can see how things would have gotten overwhelmed.
Oh man. I'm probably digging a little bit too much here, but I'm curious. There were a lot of tunnels and things underneath churches and things like that, usually where they would bury monks and that sort of thing. Is that going to be present in this also? Will there be like a nice healthy underground system?
Yes. Now, proper sewer systems didn't really come in until the Victorian age, but the Romans had a go. So if you think of that, and then a lot of inns and well-to-do houses had big basement complexes for wine cellars and servants' quarters and things like that, were often not just below stairs, but below ground. So there's that aspect to it. And then, the churches and the cathedrals have their catacombs and their crypts and so on. So yeah, that's all there.
Kids, graveyard. I want to see the parish foundling hospitals. I don't. I can't imagine that, a bunch of zombie children and babies.
Well, there are definitely zombie children in this. So again, because it's partly based on these cities that I know, like Salisbury and Winchester and so on, there's been a famous private school in the real Winchester for a long time. So yeah, there'll be plenty of child zombies. Then there were the charitable schools as well. So yeah.
How many will there be actually animal undead also, or?
Don't know if I want to necessarily give that away, but certainly most animals will not be. It's mostly humans.
Well, that's good. I don't have to worry about Fido coming back and eating you after he dies.
Yeah, but the same thing that raised the dead has had an effect on living things as well. Let's put it that way.
Okay, so there are some unnatural beasties as well as undead. Nice. This is going to be fun, man. This is going to be so much fun. I cannot wait to use this. Um, oh, wait a minute. Here we go. Whack-a-mist zombies. How can we tell the difference?
Well, I'm sure you'll find a way.
Oh, and you do say there's going to be lots of different zombie types, like not just your typical, shambling undead. I mean, what are you gonna have like Return of the Living Dead type things where every single part of the body is alive or something?
That becomes difficult because they're pretty much impossible to kill. But certainly there will be some body part stuff, body horror going on. Mostly it's to do with the environment that the zombies been in. Some of them will be influenced from what they did during their life as well, kind of like Bub.
Oh.
So if a priest dies and resurrects as a zombie, he's going to be different to a peasant who dies and is resurrected as a zombie, which is going to be different to a musketeer or a pikeman or a merchant. There's the more sort of obvious physical differences, like someone who starves to death will be a skeletal zombie, which is going to be different to a zombie that's been laying in the river that runs through the city and has got all bloated and gassy and slimy. Yeah, that's going to be different again. And some other more peculiar and eldritch. And someone has been experimenting with the dead. So you might run into something really outlandish.
I can't imagine that would be a nasty place to find a lich or something. But wow. Well, man, I'm really stoked about this. I'm glad I backed it. I do need to kind of up my pledge to get my own personal zombie in that. In fact, why don't we talk about that real quick? You've got add-ons for adding in your own zombies. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, though Indiegogo's not really set up particularly well for for doing add-ons, so I've had to kind of kit bash something together. But yeah, as a backer, you can ask to have yourself or anyone you like really put into the game as a zombie.
Nice. I think that'll be fun. And there's like no limit to that, huh?
I think I set an initial limit of 100, but I'll be willing to go over that.
Oh, man.
If it should 100. Get that high.
Now, a lot of projects that are crowdfunded have like lists of backer names and stuff like that in the book. Is that going to be in there too? Or?
Probably, unless I really need that extra page.
Nice. So I'll be immortalized in there somehow. The T-shirted historian will have a place on the page. Nice. Now,
and a zombie wearing only a shirt.
There you go. Hey, I can't wait. That'll be fun. Well, all right. We've hit about an hour. So it's probably a good time to close out. But just in case there were any questions that I missed and things you want to address, Grim, is there anything that you need to tell us about this project?
It's a lot of work. But I'm still excited about it.
Oh, yeah.
The reason I tend to flip from project to project to project and not so much developing a single big project is because I have too many ideas. But this has held my attention, which is a good sign. But yeah, it's what you see is when the book does come out. It's probably only about half the work that's gone into it because of all the research and thought and detail. And I hope that comes through. And like I say, I wanted to make something that would maybe bring some of the newer school players over to the dark side of more old school style play, perhaps a little bit. And I hope it will help. This is stupidly ambitious, but I hope it will help change the paradigm of how some adventures and things are written. And how we as game designers can make things easier for the games master in certain ways. I think that's an aspect of play that hasn't really been dealt with particularly well, because a lot rests on the shoulders of the games master, and this is why I tend to prefer slightly lighter, more improvisational games to something like D&D, which is very high prep, and you're considering encounter balance and so on if you're playing one of the more modern editions. So hopefully the incorporation of tools to help the games master will be something that catches on, I hope. And also the idea of more open-ended adventures. I mean, it's kind of half-setting and an undirected adventure, whereas most adventures are very linear. They can't help but be linear because of the constraints of publishing. But in doing this, in creating more of a sort of free-roaming zone where you can make your own quests, or you can pick up storylines and follow them through, or make your own things to do, I hope that's something that catches on more. But it's really hard to do in a printed product.
Yeah, I agree. And for myself, personally, I do prefer sandboxing games rather than scripted module type things. I mean, I will use modules. I will crib from them for like locations, setups, encounters, things like that. But I tend not to use their plots so much because of the amount of scripting in them.
I mean, the more linear plots and things, they're good for streaming games if you're doing them as performance. But I think all the more satisfying things that I've ever run have been more sandboxy. There might be a mission from session to session, but the overall game didn't have that. It was free to do what you wanted. I think that's just more satisfying.
I think we've addressed this one with Kit, but I'll ask: are the individual stories in the properties capable of being kit bashed into that kind of open adventure? I.e., are there elements within them that are designed to be connected storylines?
So the quest lines part is really still at the sort of thumbnail sketch stage at the moment. The idea is more that simply by exploring, you will find clues to stories and things that either happened before, during, or after. And then by following those, you'll get clues to other things, and you can gradually piece things together and close off certain quest lines or eliminate certain major sources of conflict. And so I'm not really describing it very well, but it's less linear than a kind of intermingled sort of tree of stuff, and then you can sort of pick away at this knot and figure things out as you go along.
Me personally, just thinking about this after all that we've talked about, I had a perfect idea for this setting, if nothing else. Do an escape from New York type scenario where some baddie has captured a major player in the land and smuggled them into this horrible place, and you have a team that has to go in and get them out or something. But one thing you probably could do, maybe I'll add this now, but someone could have been convicted and thrown in there before word arrived that the king had given him a pardon. So then you have to play maybe a group of soldiers or mercenaries who are sent in there to get this guy back before he gets eaten. Yeah. I mean that's why I love this as just an open-ended setting. There's so many possibilities that may or may not be present in the book when it's finished, but certainly it's going to lend itself to a lot of imagination and a lot of adventures. And I'm curious to see what players will actually do. I mean, are they going to become, are they going to fortify some place and try to get all the factions together and become like little warlords of the Dead Kingdom, as it were? Or, this is cool, man. This is going to be a great product. I think I'm really happy I'm back in this, man. I really am.
I'm curious to see what people do with it. You never hear back that much about what people do with the stuff that you write. Yeah, that's. I mean, people will say, "Oh, this is good, this is great," to an extent when they're not telling you off. But you don't. Certainly as an indie creator, you don't necessarily get to see what people are doing with your games very often. I think Machinations of the Space Princess, I've gotten to see what some people have done with that, and that's been very interesting. I've had reports back on a couple of my more sort of small, simple comedic games, which has been gratifying. And one of the comedy books I wrote for Mongoose Publishing way back in the early to mid 2000s. Some people set up an entire sort of magical university based sex comedy game using nymphology blue magic. So that was quite interesting. I didn't see that thing that just flashed up. What was
Lord Thoth? He says, "I'm happy to be backing as well. Going to be a Scream."
I do hope so. I'm getting increasingly worried about letting people down at this point. I'm not used to bigging myself up so much. It's very un-British.
Well, that's, we have faith in you, man. I've read your stuff in the past, and I think it's going to be great. If it's even half of the awesome that you've been describing, I think it'll still be pleasing. It certainly will be more interesting than a lot of the products from regularly published authors, I should say.
Yeah, I'm taking a few risks, doing a few things a bit differently, and I think that's what it's all about, really.
Yeah, and Lord Thoth agrees. No, it'll be fine. So,
all right, Critical Drinker.
Yep. Oh, I didn't know you watched The Drinker too. Oh, Grim, you surprised me.
I'm full of surprises.
It'll be fine.
Surprises and goo.
There we go.
Definitely
Surprises
smells shite.
Yes, definitely smells shite. Oh gosh. Well, I guess that's going to wrap us up. Thank you very much for hanging out with me and having this interview. I could see that the game is well on its way to succeeding. You still got 39, 40 days left.
Yeah, still 2/3 of the time left, I think.
So there we go.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, risk is our business. It's why we're out here. It's why we're a boarder. Yep, that's right. That's right. All right. Well, until our next show, thank you all very much for tuning in and hanging out with us. And, if you didn't catch us while we were live, I hope you enjoyed the replay. So until then, take care and have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Look! A Dungeons and Dragons ride! Exercise.